Lakota, you're muted. Could you unmute yourself?
Hi, can you hear me? Can you hear me okay? Can y'all hear me okay? Hello? Hello, can you hear me now? Okay.
I can hear you now. I think you're good.
Okay, perfect. So do you want me to go ahead and get started, or should we give folks a few more minutes?
wrong button. I think we are good to go ahead and get started.
Okay, perfect. So bonjour everyone. Bonjour Jaya Kinwa, Lakota Pochedley and Dejnakas, Mina, Manoido Kod and Dejnakas, Bodoi Wadmi Kwandao, Shishubani Ekna de Bendagwis, Mong Ondodam, Cleveland, Ohio, and Dochbia, Mina, Kalamazoo, Michigan, and Diane. Bonjour everyone. My name is Lakota Pochedley. I am a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and I'm the granddaughter of Robert and Joyce Pearl, and I am a member of the Slavin family. I grew up here outside of Cleveland, Ohio, but about 10 years ago, I started living down in Oklahoma, and about 3.5 years ago, moved back up to the Great Lakes and now live in Southwest Michigan. And so today we're going to talk about Moccasins or Moccasins. And so if everybody has their kits, you can, if you haven't already, you can begin cutting out your pattern, and you can kind of see, you just want to follow the arrows that were drawn on the pattern for cutting it out. And also in the meantime too, well, if you haven't already cut out your pattern, or if you've already cut out your pattern, go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. I think it's always helpful to kind of know who's in the classes, and you know, that way if there's ever any follow-ups and stuff like that. So thank you everyone for being here, miigwech, and looking forward to getting started tonight. And as you finish cutting out your patterns, please let me know if you've finished, and then I can move on to the next step. Oh. Is there a way that we can open the chat? I know we did it for the previous session that I was on Wednesday.
I think that should have done it, but let me know if it's not working.
Perfect, thank you. And yes, if the chat isn't disabled yet, just go ahead and put it in the Q&A if you're running into difficulties. So I believe someone else just joined. So we're just at the step of cutting out the pattern. I've asked everyone to go ahead and introduce themselves in the chat. And once you are finished cutting out your pattern, just give notice in the chat, and then we'll move to the next step. Bonjour, Vivian. Bojo Roslyn. Okay, I'll give about another 30 seconds or so for folks to finish cutting out their patterns. And so when you're done, you should have your main moccasin pattern and then your 2 welts. Okay, so when you are getting started to cut out your moccasins, you first need to check your buckskin. So I kind of pulled up this area in particular. As you can see, there's some holes in it. There's a number marked onto it. And so you want to make sure that your pattern doesn't cover those because you don't want those in your moccasins. So what you do, and 2, something kind of similar to sewing, you always want to conserve as much as you can. So you want to try and find those spots where you can use as much material as possible. So like one area that may work really well for tonight is this area right here. So what you'll do is you will take your pattern and you want to hold it on there. If you're kind of nervous about it, you can always set something heavier on there as you're tracing it. And you'll just take a pen or a pencil. Just make sure it's not like a felt pen that can kind of leak. And you're just going to trace your pattern. And once I'm finished tracing, I will show everyone as well before I cut it out. Okay, so it should look a little bit like this. Trying to make sure. And so you're going to cut directly on that line to cut out those materials. Also, as you can see, I've got a little extra from the edge on this side. So that's where I'm going to place my welts. And I'm just gonna go ahead and do this other one on this side, since I've pretty much ran out of room on the other side. And two, because I know some of you are working with a square, so feel free to kind of use this space up here for those welts as well. And so, at least for today's class, just make sure that you have one of your main pattern for your mock, and then you're gonna need 2 smaller welts and 2 longer welts. Or actually, you really only need one of each for one mock. I apologize about that. Okay, so also I realized I got a little bit ahead of myself. So in each kit, I know there was a supplies list included. At least within the kit, 2 Glover's needles, a piece of sinew, and a piece of hide. And these would be enough materials to make one baby moccasin for tonight's class, so that folks can kind of become familiar with the methods. I am on my mom's computer and she is getting a call. So, but then additionally, there were 2 copies of the pattern that were included. And that was because in case you messed up, just making sure that you always had a pattern that you could use. And then also some additional supplies that would come from around the house would be a pair of scissors that are sharp enough to cut through your hide. So you can use a pair of needle nose pliers if your needle is getting stuck in the buckskin. Sometimes folks even use an awl and pre-poke all of their holes. But what I typically do most often is you can use a scrap piece from when you're cutting out your moccasin. And that scrap piece can be used to grab a hold of your needle and pull it through. Also, always recommend tissues and Band-Aids. So the needle that we'll be working with tonight is a Glover's needle. And so you can see if you're looking at yours, there's 3 sides to it. It's pretty sharp. So sometimes there can be mishaps when you're trying to pull your needle through and you can poke yourself and it will draw potentially a little bit of blood, but nothing that is crazy. So just to be prepared, and then also 1 pen or pencil for tracing your pattern. And so I'll give folks a few more minutes to work on cutting out their pieces, but I was going to talk a little bit about these pucker toe moccasins. So I have my mock right here. And so as you can see, these are kind of a unique style that come out of the Western Great Lakes. And so it's really common to see folks rocking some center seam pucker toe mocks around Shawnee area. So that would include folks like, besides Potawatomi, also Sac and Fox, Kickapoo, absentee Shawnee. Also, you know, some of the Southeastern tribes also wore a center seam mock, but they look a little bit different in terms of how that pucker is created. Also, Miami tribe, who is up in the northeast corner, has a similar pucker style of, or center seam pucker style of mock. And then also, you know, around Michigan as well. And so when first kind of learning about making Moccasins or moccasins, the first class I had taken was in Shawnee at the Heritage Center, and Janice Deere, who is Kickapoo, had taught the class. And so if, you know, that is one method in which you can make pucker toes. And she has a lot of good teachings as well, and kind of talking about the old ways in which we would make those moccasins. And so some of those things that are really important to understand about our moccasins is, you know, we always want them to look really rounded. You don't want kind of sharp pointy toes. You want a nice round laying mock, because that's really kind of evokes our style of moccasin. And also she was the one who had kind of first taught me about putting these rabbit ears, as she called them, on the backs of our mocks. And what folks will also call those are trails. And so as you travel throughout Indian country, it's common to kind of see folks from different tribes having different styles of trails. And so trails were used back in the day. There's a couple different teachings and stories that go with those trails, that one were a way to kind of cover up your tracks, but also they could serve as a means of kind of letting folks know who might be in their territory by seeing some of those markings that they left. And so, you know, these are just kind of some of the older elements that we still like to include today to remember, some of those ways. And so additionally, after moving up to Michigan, I had learned this style of center seam moccasins from Madeline Big Bear. And so I'm going to be pulling some of the things that I learned from Janice, but then kind of using this style that Madeline had taught as a dancer. I really like this style because when dancing scrub, they really can hold up and just really enjoy making this style of mock as well. And so also, when up here, folks will really talk about how when they see folks seeing this center seam mock, it really is a reminder to our history of, when the Three Fires Confederacy kind of broke apart, not necessarily broke apart, but began traveling and kind of becoming independent communities. So that would be the Potawatomi, the Odawa, and Ojibwe. The Potawatomi began to live with some of the other Western Great Lakes tribes like Miami and Kickapoo and Sac and Fox. And so you can really see our shared histories together and kind of seeing similar styles and similar life ways. And so that's just some initial kind of basics and histories about where this style of moccasin comes from and why it is kind of considered a Potawatomi style moccasin as well, or in Western Great Lakes more broadly. So to get started, also, if I'm going too fast or if questions come up or you run into issues, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A. And we will try and figure those out with you. And so I just had this little piece that kind of showed a little too much ink than I preferred. So feel free, if you kind of do your first pass and realize that, I need to kind of clean this up, feel free to do that. So to begin with, I kind of use terms from sewing because that's what I am most familiar with as well. And so when sewing, there's usually a right side and a wrong side. And so for our purposes today, I'm going to call the finished side, the suede, or the smooth side, the finished side, or the right side, and then the sueded side, the wrong side. And so as you can see with this moccasin, the sueded side, the wrong side is used for the ears, and then the finished side or the right side is kind of used for the top of the moccasin. So when we're sewing, we want it to be inside out. So you're going to have the wrong side facing out. So first, what you're going to do is kind of line up your moccasin. You want to make sure you can always take this time too. If things aren't quite even, you can kind of trace things and just make sure they are. And also, I always flip it over to do one last double check. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take your longer strip of buckskin, this longer welt, and you're going to start it here. And so you're going to put it into that fold, and you're going to want the edge of that welt to be flush with the rest of, or the folded part of your main moccasin. So. So once you have that, you can set that down, leave it. And then next you're gonna take your arm's width of sinew. And honestly, since we're doing baby mocks, you can do about just an arm and a shoulder. And so with sinew, what's important to know is you can split it. So you don't necessarily always use one whole piece of it. Typically for moccasins, I'll typically at least split it into 3, sometimes 5 pieces, but typically 3 is most common for me at least. And so I'll kind of do that again. And you'll kind of see your sinew kind of splitting naturally. And if you see it kind of trying to fight and really fray, then you can kind of just pull it back together with your fingers and kind of try somewhere like further along in your sinew and kind of start pulling it apart to see where it naturally is kind of coming apart. Here we go. And if it starts bunching up like this, let's see. Don't worry. Again, you can just kind of clean it up, pull it back together, and you can figure out again where you need to split it at. So for right now, I'm going to leave my sinew a little bit thicker so that you can see it better on the camera. But next, you're just going to thread your sinew through the eye of your glover's needle. And you won't be doubling your thread. So you're gonna leave this kind of tail part of your sinew, or sorry, doubling your sinew. So you're gonna leave this tail part out and you're only going to tie a knot for this single string here. So you can see the tail is still over here and then the end of the sinew is here, and that's where you're gonna tie your knot. So it will only be the single piece of sinew that you're gonna tie the knot at. And I usually, you wanna tie your knots right on top of each other. And I typically tie about 3 to 4 knots. Depending, it can depend sometimes on the size of glover needle that I'm using. Okay, and I will pause right there and just double check if anybody has questions. Okay. So again, you're going to come back to your buckskin. And again, you're going to want to make your welt flush with the folded part. And so you're going to make your first stitch. And so one of the things that Janice taught me when first learning to make moccasins is kind of remembering that, you know, we didn't use rulers and other measurement tools necessarily back then, or we had other ways of determining measurement. So one of the things that I used when kind of making my initial patterns and kind of figuring out my stitching is I use kind of my fingernails to give an idea for measurement. So with this first stitch, you're going to want your stitch to be as close to this fold as possible. And you're going to want to come in about half of your pinky fingernail. So I'll kind of show on there how I kind of measure that out. But you don't want to be so close to the fold that you don't catch the welt in your first stitch. So here you can see it there. That's where my needle is at. And I'm going to pull it all the way through and I'll show it again so that you can see the knot. And so because this is our first stitch, we want to secure this stitch and secure that knot. And so you're actually going to come around and re-stitch within that same hole again. And so this is a good opportunity. You can use your spare piece of fabric if you're running into issues and kind of push your needle through using that fabric. And so that stitch is going to go right there and loop around. I'm going to go through one more time. And secure it. And then similar to like if you're hand sewing, you can go ahead and make another knot. And also, so when you're doing that, when you're going underneath that loop, be careful with the top part of your Glover's needle because it is sharp enough to cut your thread. So as you can see, again, kind of going underneath those loops, pulling through and going through the loop created to pull that knot. So next, what you're going to do, so it's a little bit harder on baby mocks because they're a little bit smaller. And so typically for an adult size mock, I would go about my whole width for each stitch of my pinky fingernail. You can go a little bit less, maybe about somewhere between your full pinky and 3/4 of your pinky nail. And again, use that spare piece. And you're gonna come about half a pinky nail's size in from the edge of the buckskin. So I'm gonna show you here. And I already made my first mistake. So this is why you don't want to double knot you don't want to use tie both sides of your sinew together. So as you can see, I went through the wrong side for that stitch. So you're gonna pull out your needle and you can just pull out that sinew then. Then all you have to do is rethread your needle and poke back through on the right side. And you can use the hole that you poke through on the other side. And so this would be just considered a running stitch. And so you're gonna do, let's see, 3 stitches total, like this. So it's gonna look like this. So you're gonna see 2 stitches on one side and 1 stitch on the other side. Actually, let's do 4 on this baby mock. So you wanna see 2 running stitches on each side. And so this is just to kind of give a flatter surface. As you can see, some of those stitches go kind of where that mock will sit beneath your foot. And so it just kind of helps it lay a little bit flatter. So there you go. 2 stitches this side, 2 stitches this side. And now what you're gonna do is you're gonna do the same thing again. So you're gonna secure this area. You're gonna come back through. Similar again to making that hand sewing type knot. And you'll pull that tight there. And you're gonna go through again one more time. And pull it tight. And then you're gonna go underneath and finish that up. And pull it over to the side so that knot is laying on kind of that side instead of in the middle there where you might feel it when you're walking. And go ahead and do at least 2 of those knots. And so next, you're gonna go back through and you're just gonna secure these knots or secure these stitches and make sure this way there's not gaps. So you're gonna go back through the holes that were created for each of those stitches. and I will show you what it should look like. But basically it will look like a sewing machine stitch, where it looks like there's stitches on both sides. And so there you go. Oops. So 4 total stitches. And again, you just want to seal this off with a couple knots. And you can just go through that loop that was used earlier to kind of secure your first initial stitch. Okay, and so from there, let's see. You can just cut it off. Something that I forgot to kind of specify is some optional additional supply is just a lighter. So one of the things that I was taught is that you can just use that lighter to kind of seal off your knots. And you just want to be careful because sinew will burn if it kind of catches too quickly. And then it may kind of burn into your knot and kind of defeat the point. So you want to cut your sinew pretty short. And you're gonna take the lighter and just kind of get it warm so it starts to melt. And then you can kind of just touch it and kind of push it into that knot and it will meld right there. So next, you just want to tie another knot at the end of your sinew. And you're going to go through that, the hole that you had already made, and go ahead and do another loop. So see. And again, just make that knot and we'll start our puckering part. That gives our mocks this look of puckers. So this is kind of just so that you guys have a sense of what we're going to be, what it should be kind of looking like. So again, you just want to make sure that your welt is lined up. And on that first side, you're gonna make your first pucker. You don't want it to be totally pressed flat together. You want it to be like a little loose. And you're gonna come down on the other side of that pucker and kind of come at it almost a little diagonal so that you're almost right next to or coming through the knot on the other side. And now you're going to repeat this on the other side. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Before you do your next pucker, you're going to come back through and again, go through the same holes. So it's going to kind of create that loop over. So next, you're going to do your next pucker. And again, you don't want it super tight and you want your the size of your puckers to be relatively even. And you just repeat this process until you come up to about a thumb's length from that V in your pattern. Or your like thumbnail's length, I should say. So I would say this is kind of one of the more difficult ways to make our pucker toe moccasins, but like I said, I do enjoy making my pucker toe moccasins this way. And also too, so I made these a little tinier than I would typically like them to be. So I will go ahead and kind of show my example of kind of gradually getting them to the size that I want them to be. But as I mentioned, this style I learned from Madeline Big Bear, and she is a citizen of Pokagon Band of Potawatomi in Southwest Michigan and Northern Indiana. And don't worry if one of your puckers is a little smaller or a little bigger than the rest. It's more when you have like 3, 4, 5 that you may want to go back and kind of redo those. And again, like you don't, you can make them a little bit too big. What you want to avoid is where when they pucker that you have, like when you flip it back through and you're seeing kind of major gaps in your pucker. With this style, it doesn't become so much of an issue. It gets a little more common in some other ways that you can make your pucker toe moccasins, but it's just something to be aware of that can happen when learning how to make moccasins. How is everyone doing? If you're able to type into the chat or Q&A, go ahead and let me know. I'll do 2 more stitches, 2 more puckers, and then show the camera more closely. Okay, so here is kind of a status update. We're kind of seeing how things should be looking. And so you can see, like I said, I felt like I made those stitches a little small at the beginning. So I gradually kind of made my puckers a little bit larger. Something to kind of pay attention to is where you have kind of the gap in the pucker, it should kind of line up with where that stitch is at. So it's almost looking like it's alternating. So I'm gonna go ahead and keep stitching up until we reach that point that I mentioned, where you wanna be about a thumbnail's length away from what would be the opening of the mock. So I will say, you know, it is different kind of doing these classes virtually. Typically we would pass these things on person to person. You know, one of the ways that I've learned in the past is kind of just standing over someone's shoulder and kind of looking at them do that, which you can kind of get in a virtual class. But during these long pauses when we're kind of just doing the work of getting all the stitches done, usually this is our time to visit with each other and find out where people are from, who their families are, and you know, different teachings and methods that people will use. I know one of the cool conversations that can happen during the Potawatomi gathering during mock classes is you'll have folks from, you know, all of the different Potawatomi bands across the US and Canada. And so sometimes folks will start sharing about the different ways that they've learned how to make mocks over the years. And even kind of the different styles. So there's a couple different styles of what would be considered pucker toe moccasins. But the additional styles that you'll see, folks like the Ojibwe and Adawa, and even sometimes I think folks who are Cree will wear pucker toe moccasins, but they use a vamp in the middle. So it's the same method of creating the pucker, but the pucker isn't down the center of the mock. And so, you know, you kind of, everyone has different teachings, everybody has different ways. But it is fun to have those conversations and kind of learn those different things. And, you know, you find out what works best for you over the years. And even like the styles or even how you want to see your mocks lay, you know, that all comes with time and practice. And so I've been making moccasins for about probably 8 to 10 years now. And so it's definitely kind of throughout that time, it's I've definitely kind of found what I like, what works best for me, even the kind of buckskin that I prefer to use, what size Glover needles that I like to use. You know, how I mentioned earlier, some people will use an awl to like pre-poke their holes. That's not something that I necessarily like to do, but hey, if that works better for you, it works better for you, and go ahead and do it. You know, it's all finding your comfortability and what makes you like find joy in making these things. You know, when I work on my different regalia pieces, I don't sew when I'm angry or sad. You know, we talk about there are teachings about kind of how we put our spirit into these things. And so you know, I don't want to put those bad things into the things that I'm making. So, you know, when I make these things, it's with love and with care. I primarily make things, regalia items for myself and for family members and friends. And so, you know, it's so folks can feel pride when they wear these things, can know that they're loved when they wear these things. So I know I'm getting pretty close to my stopping point. If you're already there, I'm hopefully catching up to you. And I'll probably give about a minute after I finish to check in with everyone. Let me know if you're real behind, or if we're good to move forward. And so in this case, so as you can see, when I line up my thumb, looking at my thumbnail, there's room for another stitch, but I'm probably gonna make this a smaller stitch and a smaller pucker, just because I don't want to lose too much. Because I want to make sure that whoever may be wearing this moccasin, you know, they've got room to slip their foot in. You know, hopefully I'll finish these up. One of my best friends is getting ready to have her second baby. And so, you know, ship these down to her in Oklahoma. And you just want to make sure that those ends line up right when you're making those final stitches. And I'll show you right after I do this last stitch and pucker. So if you've made it this far and have been patient enough, good way gets to you. This is probably the hardest part, but we always have to do it first. And so hopefully if you've done this part, the rest will be pretty smooth sailing. So next, what we're gonna do is similar to the bottom part of your mock. We're just gonna do those straight stitches. So for this area, I'll just do 2 more stitches.
And you don't want to necessarily be like right up with that. So this last stitch, I'm going to bring in just a little bit, make it a little bit smaller. And again, you're going to do that running stitch and just come back around. Or first, before you do that, you're going to do your loop. You're going to secure that area. Secure those stitches. Okay, next you're going to go back through, do those running stitches. Go back through the holes that you already created. And again, you're going to just come back one more time through, create that loop over the top. And you're going to tie that off. Again, be careful. You don't want your Glover's needle to cut your sinew after all the work that you just did. So next, you'll just cut that close and you'll burn that down. And so, at least to give a sneak peek, now you can kind of check out your puckers, see how it's looking. So next, something that is helpful to do at this point, I'm gonna grab another piece of sinew. I'll just start from where we tied off that knot and do the same kind of stitch. And this is just to kind of secure things. And so I'll just go through. Everyone, just to make sure. So again, you're kind of just going back over your stitches there. This is something that you can come back and do later as well. If it took you a while, and you're worried about time. I'm just gonna do it quickly so that you can see. And possibly if folks are behind, give them time to catch up. And you just want to catch every pucker. Okay, and then you're just gonna go make that one loop, or you don't even, yeah, make that one loop and tie it off. And again, I do this just for kind of security purposes. Make sure all my stitches are staying there, nothing's gonna pop. So these mocks we're making today, I'm not gonna put trails on them. But what we're gonna need to do, I realized in the pattern, we need to make a little cutout. And it just needs to be, you can use your welt pattern and kind of mark it off, but it just needs to be, it should make a square. And you can just use your pen or pencil to create that. So I just folded mine in half. And I'll show you once I get done cutting it out. You just have that little square. And so this is gonna be for, you can cut off your excess here. We'll trim that down at a later stage. But so this is gonna allow you to sew up the back of your moccasin. So, let's see. For the back of the moccasin, I usually line this up with the ear. And so I'm gonna start stitching right about this area. So again, make sure your back is lined up, your welt is lined up in the middle there, where you're gonna make your first stitch. Oh, I forgot to put my knot at the end, so don't forget to do that. And don't worry if your welt is a little bit higher than your first stitch. You can always trim it down, which I'll explain once we finish this part up. So there you can see that first stitch. And you're, again, just going to do a running stitch. So you're gonna make your stitches about the same length as these stitches. So between Pinky's fingernail and 3/4 of that. And about halfway, half of your pinky nail in. And like I said, if you don't like the distance of your stitch, feel free to take it out. I do it all the time. I think I have the perfect stitch and then I look at it and I'm like, nope. So I just got to the end. Again, I'm gonna come back around, secure that last stitch, create that loop. I'm gonna do it again. So you can see I've got about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stitches. And you're going to do the same thing again, come back up and just create that look like it's a sewing machine stitch. So next, again, you're going to secure that last stitch. Go through a couple times. And you're going to make that final knot. And again, I'm going to just bring these knots down. Then finally, you're going to trim this down, this welt on the back. You want to make sure you don't catch the actual main moccasin pattern. So we'll see. But you want it to be kind of tucked underneath. And now what you're going to do is create kind of like a upside down T. And so you're going to fold in. Actually, we're going to cut down this welt a little bit more. Tuck in your welt with the inside or your left hand side. Or no, sorry, I'm looking at this and I'm not used to not putting in a trail, but also, the trail wasn't included in the pattern, so here we go. So see how I cut that welt at a diagonal? You're going to do that so that you're not sewing that into this heel part of the moccasin. So see, this is that upside down T. So you're gonna take that square and press the top of that square flat with those two sides. Sorry, my mom and grandpa are in the other room watching. So again, it's kind of similar to where you start on this side. You want to start close to the fold, and this time we don't have a welt to worry about, so you just want to make sure you catch both sides of where it's folded. And you're going to pull that through. And you're going to secure it. Next, you're going to make your stitches. So you're probably going to have probably about 4 stitches total. You're going to want to come about halfway. And then when you go back through this next stitch, you kind of want to go through the middle part of what I had called the top of the square earlier. And you can use your stitching holes on the other side to help guide you find where you want that to be. Yeah, it's going to be 4 stitches. And again, with this running stitch, when you get to the other side, you're going to secure it, and then you're going to go back through the other side, giving that look of a machine sewn stitch. So I didn't come up close enough to that other stitch hole, so I'm going to redo the stitch, the original stitch hole, because you don't want to have gaps. There we go. And then again, you're just gonna come back through, secure that last stitch. And make those hand sewing knots. I'd probably do 3 or 4 on my last one. And we have a baby mock. So I'm gonna burn those down. We're gonna turn this inside out or outside in. And it's gonna be harder because it is a tiny moccasin. It's much easier with adult mocks. And so what you're gonna do is with this extra part of the welt, you're gonna trim it down. And trim it as close as you can without cutting into your buckskin. And you really want to do it, you don't want to do kind of jagged cuts because it will give it a jagged look. You want it one kind of solid sweep. I didn't do a great job of showing that example, but this is where scissors can be important and helpful. Where scissors can make a really big difference. So it can be harder on the pucker part. You want to go slow because like I said, you don't want to cut into your puckers. Sometimes I cut it a little bit bigger first on my first pass. Just so that I'm able to see more. And feel free to cut this down. And there we have our little baby mocks. So typically too, you can use water and just dip your fingers in water to kind of flatten out those puckers. And after you do that, you may find, oh, like I could trim this down even more. So for example, and a teaching that I have for when we make our babies' moccasins and for when we make those moccasins for relatives after they've walked on, we put a little hole in the bottom. And so this hole, I've always been taught like it's called like a spirit hole. And so because babies and our elders are the ones that we consider closest to the spirit world, babies have just come from there. Our elder or those who are getting ready to pass or getting ready to travel there. And so it said that, and also like with babies in particular, like when they're sleeping, you don't want to like make a lot of noise or anything like that, or crash, like do a lot of like activity, because it says that their spirits, you know, can be out and about and will leave like from the soft spot on their head, and you make that spirit whole because their spirit comes back through their feet. And so then that way, that spirit, their spirit can return when they wake up. And so, yes, so hopefully you have a completed little baby pucker toe center seam moccasin. And you know, you can always, like I said, go back through, clean things up. If also, you know, you see it's like, and like I said, you'll kind of learn different ways and different things that you like more. So put it on the screen. And there we have the little baby mock. So that's everything that I have for everyone tonight. You know, feel free if you're kind of doing this at a later time to reach out if you have questions. I'm on Facebook. And hope you all have a good evening, and thank you for your time, Miigwech, for sticking it out on this, at least here up in the Great Lakes, a pretty warm Friday evening. So too, I'll open it up to, since we just finished and we've got a couple minutes left, if folks have any questions that they want to put in the chat or in the Q&A, I've got both up and monitoring those. And thank you. If folks don't have any additional questions at this time, I hope y'all have, oh, just saw one come through. No, this is not the same pattern. So yes, there was a video created back in, I believe it was like the fall of 2015, for developing a, for having citizens create moccasins that would be used in the museum exhibit on the Trail of Death. And so that particular style of pucker toe mocks was used using the pattern and techniques that I learned from Janice Deere. After that point was when I learned this style. And so just wanted to be able to provide both options to folks, because like I said, it can depend on what folks like more, how they want their mocks to fit, stuff like that. So I figured, you know, it's always good to have options and keep learning until you find what works best for you. Absolutely. So I don't think any additional questions have come in. So I think we can finish up for this evening. And Again, miigwech everyone for dedicating your evening to this. It is always fun to make these items together and kind of share those stories and teachings. So hope everybody has a good rest of the night. Bama mine.